Jelaine Berquist, social media editor for Seminars in Arthritis and Rheumatism. Today I am speaking with Dr. John Stone, Director of Clinical Rheumatology at Massachusetts General Hospital and Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School. He is the first author of the article, The Glucocorticoid Toxicity Index, Measuring Change in Glucocorticoid Toxicity Over Time, available in the August 2022 issue online. Keep watching for details regarding the Glucocorticoid Toxicity Index.
Thank you for joining me, Dr. Stone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berquist.
You know, I love this idea of trying to quantify the effects of steroids over time in our rheumatic disease patients. I'm wondering if you can describe the glucocorticoid toxicity index, how it came about, how it was validated.
Okay, sure. So this is something that I and colleagues have been working on for 6 years. It has taken a long time to do this. And there are really three major factors that made the GTI possible right now. First of all, there have been better therapies over the last 20, 25 years. And that actually makes it possible to potentially replace glucocorticoids, or at least to use fewer glucocorticoids than we used to. So that's one thing. There's actually a rationale and a need to develop something like the GTI now. The second thing is that computer technology evolved such that a software like 1,000 Minds could be developed. And the 1,000 Minds approach, which facilitates multi-criteria decision analysis, was really important to our group of investigators in developing the overall instrument to help simplify the decision-making process. And then the third thing is evolution of technology in other areas, namely the development of digital platforms, apps, because app technology really makes it easy to use the GTI instrument. So it's really those three things that are the background of this. So because the time was right and there was a need, I got together a group of experts from all over the world, from North America, Europe, even from down under, New Zealand and Australia. And these experts represent multiple different subspecialties, 11 or 12 different subspecialties. All of these specialties, of course, are impacted by glucocorticoids. And we began to communicate via Zoom technology. I don't even think it was Zoom. It was some other kind of communications package 5 or 6 years ago. We had about 10 Zoom meetings, if you will, before meeting face-to-face for a day-long meeting to create the weights of the different domains of the GTI. But before that, we had to make a number of decisions, and we decided which domains of steroid toxicity were important to represent in the GTI. And this decision was based on three things. One, that the toxicity had to be common, so not a rare steroid toxicity. Second, it had to be important both to patients and to clinicians. And third, the toxicity needed to be dynamic, because in a clinical trial, you want to be measuring something that can change. You don't want to measure something that's static, like osteonecrosis or avascular necrosis, for example, is damage. That's not going to change if the patient takes fewer milligrams of prednisone or more milligrams of prednisone. So the 9 domains that we chose for the GTI represent those are all domains of toxicity that can change.
Can you talk a little bit about how the GTI was validated? I'm interested in just.
Sure. Yeah, so like a lot of instruments, the first thing we did after developing the draft of the GTI was we did some preliminary validation work on paper cases, using paper cases that the experts had generated from their own practice. But then very quickly we moved into a real world experience and did a longitudinal study in a group of 101 patients with severe steroid-dependent asthma. And this was performed in collaboration with colleagues in Belfast, Northern Ireland, pulmonologists who direct a large regional asthma center. And then the final step in the validation was the use of the GTI in a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. Right after our initial paper was published in 2017, I called the chief medical officer of ChemoCentryx, a physician named Pierrot Becker. And I asked Dr. Becker if he'd heard of the GTI. And he said, yes, indeed he had. And the principal investigator in the trial that ChemoCentryx was developing had recommended that they use the GTI. So ChemoCentryx was the first company to license the GTI for use in its trial of avacopan, a novel complement inhibitor in ANCA-associated vasculitis. And that trial was called the Advocate trial. And about 4 years later, when the Advocate trial was finally done, the ChemoCentryx was a big winner, and so was the GTI, because the GTI played a very important role in helping ChemoCentryx prove its point that avacopan reduces steroid toxicity. In the primary outcome in the trial, which was remission induction at 6 months, avacopan was non-inferior to standard care. But with regard to the most important secondary endpoint of efficacy, reduction in steroid toxicity, avacopan was vastly superior to standard of care. And the GTI was essential in improving that. There are two subscores that the GTI data create: the cumulative worsening score and the aggregate improvement score. And at both 13 and 26 weeks in the GACTA trial, the avacopan group had lower GTI scores, indicating less steroid toxicity, even very early on, as early as 13 weeks. In addition to that, the investigators in the avacopan trial looked at three different thresholds of steroid toxicity, beginning with the minimum clinically important difference, or MCID, of 10 points. And at the threshold of 10 points, 20 points, and 30 points, patients in the avacopan group had lower GTI scores, lower steroid toxicity. So that proved that avacopan was not only statistically better than standard treatment in terms of reducing steroids, it did so in a clinically important way, because the differences between the two groups exceeded the MCID, or minimum clinically important difference.
And that's what you heard as we've learned about avacopan out in the clinical world is, hey, it limits steroid use, and it's lovely to hear how that came about with this index.
Thank you.
One last question I had for you. So you've designed this glucocorticoid toxicity index over time. Do you use any of your findings or anything that you know about the index in your own clinical practice of rheumatology?
Yeah, so we are actually now actively using the GTI in our clinic, and the GTI we're looking at ways to expand the GTI in other point of care options. And here again, technology comes into it. You can imagine that electronic medical records, which collect information such as hemoglobin A1C and LDL values and blood pressure and body mass index and medications, all of these are components of the GTI, which go back to the three reasons for choosing those domains. They're common, they're important to patients and to providers, and they're dynamic. And the great majority of GTI data are actually collected, or should be collected, on a routine basis for patients on steroids. And electronic medical records can greatly facilitate the collection of those data, so that the clinician actually has to do very little. So there is some training involved, but we're looking now at expanding into point of care options in large medical organizations.
Great. So it sounds like we'll be hearing about this a lot in the future.
Well, indeed, I think that's right. Over the course of the time between the time ChemoCentryx was the first company to license the GTI and the time it completed its trial, now many dozens of trials, including about a dozen phase 3 clinical trials, are using the GTI as clinical outcome assessments. And we've also developed a pediatric version called the PGTI, which also has a really slick digital platform, which makes it very easy to use. And I think that's going to help revolutionize pediatric diseases as well.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Jelaine. Really enjoyed chatting with you.
For more information regarding the Glucocorticoid Toxicity Index, please visit steritas.com. For the complete article, please visit sciencedirect.com. If you're interested in more video content from seminars in arthritis and rheumatism, please hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.